The fountain in the front courtyard was still trickling when she stepped out of the car, the early morning light casting a pale gold across the mansion's white stone walls. The air smelled faintly of roses from the manicured hedges, but there was no warmth in the scene. A tall man in an immaculate charcoal suit stood waiting just beyond the doorway, his posture straight, his face sharp and unreadable. "You're late," he said, though she knew she wasn't. His tone wasn't sharp with anger, but it was edged with something colder formality that felt like a wall. He extended a leather-bound folder toward her, and when she took it, his gaze stayed fixed on hers. "This is your contract. Read it tonight. For now, you'll learn the rules." He led her into the marble-floored foyer without looking back to see if she followed. Every step echoed. The house felt cavernous, the kind of place where a whisper might travel for miles. As he spoke, his voice was clipped, efficient, as if the words were lines he had delivered to countless people before her. "You are here to provide structure, supervision, nothing more." He moved into his study, motioning for her to stand while he leaned against the edge of the desk. "My daughter has had 5 nannies in 3 years. Each one forgot their place. I am making sure you understand yours from the beginning." She kept her posture straight, her hands folded in front of her. "Yes, sir." His eyes narrowed slightly, as if testing whether her agreement was genuine or simply polite. Then, without softening his tone, he delivered the sentence that seemed to change the air in the room. "You're not her mother. You're not family. Don't start thinking you are." The words sat heavy between them. Not loud, not cruel, but absolute. She felt the weight of them sink in, pressing against the part of her that had come into this work to do more than supervise, to protect, to nurture. But she said nothing, letting the silence stretch until he seemed satisfied she had absorbed it. "Your quarters are in the east wing, next to hers," he continued, his tone back to business. "You'll report to me at the end of each day. If I find you've overstepped, we will end this arrangement immediately." She nodded again, but in her chest, something stirred a quiet resistance that didn't show on her face. When he dismissed her, she climbed the curved staircase alone. The halls were silent, lined with portraits of stern ancestors and landscapes frozen in oil paint. As she passed one half-open door, she caught a glimpse of a small room in soft pastels, a bookshelf lined with dolls, and a pair of small shoes by the window. She didn't see the girl yet, but the warning already echoed in her head, and she knew it was one she would remember long after today. The first time she saw the girl, it was in the dining room during a late breakfast. The table was set with polished silver and white china, the kind of setting that could have hosted a banquet, yet only one small figure sat at the far end. She was neatly dressed, her hair brushed smooth, but her eyes stayed fixed on the plate as if the food were a puzzle she hadn't yet decided to solve. A pair of servants moved silently in and out, refilling juice and adjusting cutlery, but no one spoke to her, and she didn't speak to them. Over the next days, the nanny learned the rhythm of the house. The millionaire's schedule pulled him away most mornings before the girl was awake, and he rarely returned before her bedtime. Tutors came and went, teaching piano, languages, and mathematics, all in crisp 45-minute increments. Meals were served on time, lessons completed without fail, and every toy in the playroom was arranged as though on display. But warmth was absent, replaced by efficiency and order. She noticed the way the girl moved through these routines, polite, quiet, never asking for more than was offered. In a house filled with priceless art and imported furniture, she seemed like the one thing too fragile to touch. And yet, there was a longing in her gaze whenever she lingered near the garden or paused by the window as children passed by on the street below. The nanny began looking for small ways to reach her. At first, it was subtle, an extra blanket tucked over her legs during reading time, a gentle word when the piano lesson left her frustrated, a smile when their eyes met across the hall. One rainy afternoon, when the girl's schedule cleared unexpectedly, the nanny offered to read aloud from a storybook. The girl hesitated, then nodded, curling up on the armchair as the nanny's voice filled the quiet room. By the 3rd chapter, the child's head had tilted against the cushion, and her breathing had slowed into sleep. From then on, there were more of these moments. The nanny began telling her stories during lunch, not just from books, but from her own childhood tales of climbing trees, planting flowers, and playing hide-and-seek until dusk. At first, the girl listened silently, but then came the questions. What was your favorite game? Did you ever get in trouble? The answers always drew the faintest trace of a smile, the kind that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The first time she laughed, it was over something small. The nanny had pretended to lose a game of checkers, acting overly dramatic as she slid the final piece across the board. The girl's laughter was quick, almost surprised, as though she'd forgotten the sound. The nanny pretended not to notice, but inside she knew something had shifted. The house was still vast and formal, the routine still precise, but in these small spaces between rules, a quiet trust was growing. And while the millionaire might see her as staff, the girl was beginning to see her as something far more important. It began with a single request one quiet afternoon. The girl appeared in the doorway of the nanny's small sitting room, clutching a hairbrush and a pale ribbon between her fingers. She didn't speak at first, just held them out with an expectant look. The nanny took them gently, patting the spot beside her. The girl sat down without hesitation, and for the next several minutes the room was filled only with the sound of the brush gliding through soft hair. When the braid was tied neatly with the ribbon, the girl caught her reflection in the nearby mirror and smiled faintly before whispering a quiet thank you. From then on, these little moments began to multiply. At bedtime, the girl started asking for stories, not from the stack of glossy picture books in her room, but from the nanny herself. She wanted to hear about the places she had lived, the games she had played as a child, the adventures she'd had that didn't exist in storybooks. The nanny noticed how the girl's eyes stayed wide open, following every word until they slowly grew heavy and finally closed. She would linger until the girl's breathing was steady, then slip out into the dimly lit hall. When storms rolled in, rattling the tall windows and filling the rooms with low, rolling thunder, the girl's footsteps would find their way to wherever the nanny was working. Sometimes she would not even ask, just curl up beside her with a blanket, her small frame pressing close, as if proximity alone could shield her from the sound outside. The nanny would stay still, letting the girl's hand grip her sleeve until the flashes faded and the rain softened to a steady whisper. The other staff began to notice. Passing in the halls, they would see the girl walking beside the nanny instead of her tutor, or lingering in the kitchen to help dry dishes she wasn't supposed to touch. There were glances exchanged in the laundry room, murmurs that stopped when she entered. It wasn't disapproval so much as caution, as if they were all quietly aware of the rules and wary of the consequences for breaking them. The millionaire's presence loomed, even when he wasn't in the room. His absence from these moments was almost as strong as his earlier warnings. The staff knew better than to speak of the growing closeness between the nanny and his daughter, but the truth of it was there in plain sight. The girl sought her out now, not because she was assigned to watch her, but because she wanted to be near her. One evening, as the nanny tucked the girl into bed after another long day, the child reached out and placed her small hand over hers. "You make the house feel warm," she said softly, almost like a secret. The nanny didn't answer right away, afraid that words might shatter the fragile trust they had built. Instead, she gave the girl's hand a gentle squeeze, and in that quiet, unspoken way, promised she would keep it that way for as long as she could. The afternoon sun lay warm across the garden, turning the grass a bright green and drawing the scent of lilacs into the air. The girl darted between the flower beds with a small wicker basket in hand, collecting petals that had fallen from the blooms. Her laughter carried lightly over the hedges, as the nanny kept a watchful eye from a few paces away, pausing now and then to pull weeds from the edges of the path. The moment happened fast. A loose stone shifted under the girl's foot as she rounded the corner of a path. She stumbled, then fell forward with a startled gasp. The sound of skin scraping against the gravel was small but sharp. Before the nanny could call out, the girl was already on her feet, tears brimming in her eyes, clutching her knee. She ran, not toward the house or the bench, but straight into the nanny's arms. The nanny knelt instinctively, catching her before the sobs could spill over completely. The girl buried her face into the soft folds of the apron, her voice muffled but clear enough to pierce the moment. "It's okay. Mom's here." The nanny froze, her hands holding the small shoulders, her heart thudding at the word. For an instant, she was caught between the impulse to gently correct the child and the instinct to pull her closer. The rules the millionaire had given her echoed like a warning in the back of her mind, but the trembling weight of the girl leaning against her silenced them. She chose to stay still, one hand smoothing the girl's hair, the other resting lightly on her back. "Let's have a look," she murmured softly, glancing down at the scrape, already reddening. The girl didn't pull away, her small fist still gripping the apron fabric as though letting go might make the hurt return. Neither of them noticed the shadow on the terrace. The millionaire stood there, hands resting on the railing, his expression unreadable. His eyes lingered on the scene, his daughter pressed into the embrace of someone he had told to keep her distance, her voice trusting and unguarded as she gave the title to another woman. The nanny reached into the pocket of her apron for a clean handkerchief. Gently dabbing away the specks of gravel clinging to the skin, she spoke in a low voice, steady and reassuring, promising that the scrape would heal quickly. The girl sniffled, managing a small nod, but she didn't step back until the nanny offered her a smile and held out a hand to help her up. When they walked back toward the house, the girl kept her fingers entwined with the nanny's, swinging their joined hands lightly despite the sting in her knee. The sun caught in her hair, and in that moment, the nanny knew that no amount of rules could erase the bond that had taken root. Somewhere above them, unseen now, the man who made those rules had just witnessed the truth for himself. The knock came later than she expected, just after the rest of the house had gone quiet. One of the staff appeared at her door, their voice low as they told her the millionaire wanted to see her in his study. She felt the weight of it immediately, a heaviness that settled in her chest as she walked through the dim hallways. The study door was open just enough to reveal the warm glow of the desk lamp inside, casting long shadows over the polished wood floor. He did not rise when she stepped in. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him, eyes fixed on her with a cold precision. "Close the door," he said, his voice sharp but measured. She obeyed, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should have. "I saw what happened in the garden," he began, his tone like a blade sliding from its sheath. "Do you remember our first conversation? Do you remember the rules?" She stood still, hands folded in front of her, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I do," she said, "and I also remember your daughter coming to me hurt and frightened. She called me something I didn't ask for, something I never encouraged. But she needed comfort, and I gave it to her." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You are here to work, not to play mother? You're not her mother?" The last words were drawn out as though repetition could make them more true. "I know I'm not," she replied evenly, "but I am here to care for her, and sometimes that means being the person she feels safe with, even if it makes you uncomfortable." The silence that followed was tense, the kind that seemed to stretch the walls tighter around them. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Do not mistake kindness for permission. If this happens again, if she calls you that again, you will correct her, immediately. Is that understood?" She could feel the heat of defiance rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "What I understand is that a child reached for me in a moment of pain. I won't push her away when she needs someone to hold on to." Something flickered in his expression, then anger, maybe frustration, maybe something else he wouldn't name. He straightened, his chair creaking under the shift of weight, and dismissed her with a curt nod. "You may go." As she stepped back into the hallway, the air felt cooler, quieter, as though the rest of the house had been holding its breath. She walked toward her quarters with slow, deliberate steps, knowing he believed his words had settled the matter. But inside, the decision was already made. If the girl needed her again, if she reached out with that same trust, no warning, no rule, and no sharp voice from behind a desk would keep her from answering. It began with a quiet knock on her door just after dawn, the kind of knock that carried urgency without volume. One of the maids stood there, worry etched into her face, and said only that the girl was unwell. She followed quickly, the hallway still dim in the early light, her steps quickening as she reached the child's room. The air inside was heavy with the faint scent of fever. The girl lay curled under the covers, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy with exhaustion. A tray with untouched breakfast sat on the table by the window, the steam long gone cold. A glass of water and a small cup with measured medicine sat beside it. The nanny crouched down beside the bed, speaking softly, but the girl only shook her head weakly, her voice cracking as she murmured for her. The sound of the door behind her made her glance up. The millionaire stood in the frame, one hand gripping the edge of the door as if uncertain whether to enter. His face was tense, his eyes darting between his daughter and the medicine untouched on the table. For a moment, the warning he had given her weeks ago seemed to stand between them like a physical barrier. She waited, her hand still resting lightly on the girl's blanket, and after a long pause, he stepped aside, allowing her fully into the space. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand brushing damp hair from the girl's forehead. The skin was warm under her touch, and she reached for a cool cloth from the basin the staff had left nearby. Gently, she pressed it against the fevered skin, murmuring words meant to soothe rather than instruct. The girl's eyes fluttered shut, her body relaxing fractionally under the familiar comfort. Between coaxing her to sip water and keeping the cloth cool, She began telling soft, winding stories, ones without beginnings or endings, meant only to drift like a lullaby. They were tales from her own childhood, of summer nights under wide skies, of hiding from sudden rains, of the smell of bread baking in her mother's kitchen. The words seemed to thread through the stillness, giving the feverish child something to hold on to. The hours stretched quietly, the light outside shifting from early gold to muted gray as the day passed. The millionaire came and went silently, lingering at the threshold now and then, his expression unreadable. He did not interrupt, and he did not reassert the old rule. By nightfall, the girl's fever had eased slightly, enough for her to rest without stirring. The nanny remained in the chair beside the bed, the cool cloth folded neatly in her lap, her eyes watching the rise and fall of the small figure under the blankets. When she finally allowed herself to lean back, she caught a glimpse of the man in the doorway again, his hand resting lightly against the frame. He said nothing, but there was no mistaking it this time. He had chosen to let her stay. By the end of the week, the fever had passed, and color had returned to the girl's cheeks. She moved through the halls again with a lightness that had been missing for days, her small footsteps echoing off the marble. The house was still as vast as ever, but there was a softness in the air now, something that lingered after each interaction. The millionaire never spoke of that night she stayed by the girl's bedside. He did not offer thanks, nor did he acknowledge the quiet defiance it had taken to break his earlier rule. Yet something in his behavior had shifted. When the girl reached for her hand in the hall, he no longer cleared his throat or glanced sharply their way. When she settled in the nanny's lap to listen to a story, he did not remind her of boundaries. It was the girl herself who carried the change forward. She continued to call her mom, not in whispers, not just when they were alone, but with the ease of someone naming what she believed to be true. The nanny never encouraged it, but she never corrected it either. Each time the word left the child's lips, it settled into the space between them, becoming part of the rhythm of the house. Among the staff, there was no need for discussion. They saw the way the girl leaned into her, the way she laughed more freely now, the way she spoke with confidence that had not been there before. In hushed conversations over laundry or in the kitchen, there was an unspoken agreement that some rules were better broken. They knew she had been hired to care for the child's daily needs, but what she was giving her went beyond schedules and supervision. Even the rooms seemed to reflect the change. The girl's bedroom felt warmer, the lights softer, the shelves lined not just with untouched toys, but with well-worn books and crafts they had made together. The garden became their shared space, a place where the girl's laughter rose above the hedges as she chased butterflies or showed off a flower she had picked just for her. The millionaire still maintained his distance in many ways, but now, when he passed them in the hall, his gaze lingered just a little longer. Once, she caught the faintest curve of a smile when his daughter ran ahead, calling for her mom to follow. The house remained grand, the rules still present in their own quiet way, but the lines between staff and family had blurred. And every night, when she tucked the girl in and smoothed the blanket around her, she knew she had kept her promise to herself. She had chosen to be there when the child needed her, no matter the risk. What had started as a job had grown into something far more lasting, and in that warmth, the title the girl had given her no longer felt like a boundary crossed, but a truth finally spoken.